The Perry-Mansfield Performing Arts School and Camp, located in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, is the oldest continuous camp of its type in the United States. Hi, I'm John Ferrugia. This oasis for the performing arts has been credited as the birthplace of modern dance. In fact, choreographer Agnes DeMille credits her time in Colorado as inspiration for her work such as Rodeo and Oklahoma. In this episode, you'll meet Charlotte Perry and Portia Mansfield, the pioneering women who created this unique place in the Rocky Mountain West. And now, Colorado Experience, Perry-Mansfield Performing Arts School and Camp.
Perry-Mansfield is magic.
This is a place that can make an artist whole.
The connection to nature here is unlike any other place I've ever taught.
Everywhere you turn, there's just beauty all around you, and it just sparks inspiration.
I don't think there are a lot of performing arts camps that can say they have the kind of history that Perry-Mansfield has.
This is the oldest continuously operated summer arts program in the country.
This program was funded by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with support from the Denver Public Library, History Colorado, with additional funding and support from these fine organizations. And viewers like you, thank you.
Charlotte Perry was a Colorado girl. She was born in Denver. Her father owned coal mines in Colorado. Of course, because he was involved in coal mining, he was also involved in railroads. They went riding and skiing and hiking and spent a great deal of time outdoors. Charlotte was a theater fan.
And she hoped to be involved at some level in the performing arts, as an actress or as a playwright or a producer.
She was also quite a musician. She was an excellent violinist, and her entire life she spent a lot of time every day playing her violin.
When she was a young woman, her father sent her to Smith College, not to train her in a career, but as he put it, to turn her into a lady. Portia Mansfield, SWETT, as she was originally known, she later dropped her last name and just became Portia Mansfield.
She didn't think SWETT looked good on posters and marquees, so she started using her mother's maiden name.
She grew up in Chicago society, which outside of New York was the society to grow up in.
And Portia was a dancer, and she was always moving, never stood still, was just always dancing. Her father ran hotels, so they'd kind of move around where his jobs took him. Her whole summers were spent out of doors in the Adirondacks where her father was working.
As Charlotte Perry was inspired by theater, Portia Mansfield was inspired by dance, and her particular hero was Isadora Duncan, an American dancer who was revolutionizing dance in the United States. Duncan was pulling American dance away from the very rigid routines of ballet, and that attracted Portia Mansfield. So Mansfield went to Smith College with the idea of developing her understanding and her skills of what would one day become modern dance.
Charlotte and Portia met each other at Smith College in Massachusetts.
I believe Portia was a little older than Charlotte. She graduated a year or two before Charlotte. Neither lady was temperamentally prepared to be a young society matron when they graduated from college, so they moved to Chicago.
They had this idea that they wanted to create a dance camp.
They lived in Chicago and they would teach ballroom dancing and society dancing in the wintertime.
And in 1911, Charlotte Perry invited her friend Portia to come out to Colorado and participate in a bear hunt in northwestern Colorado.
No, I didn't ever kill the bear, but I liked running after him. That was great fun. Charlotte killed one, but she didn't like it, and she never did again.
And for Mansfield, you can imagine this Chicago socialite to ride in the Rocky Mountains on horseback, to camp by Rocky Mountain lakes, to breathe in that high, dry, cool air of the Rockies inspired her.
Charlotte Perry and Portia Mansfield had a notion that women weren't given enough opportunities to seriously study these art forms.
And they just decided that there was nothing for it but to come out here and create this space where people could learn those two disciplines, combine those disciplines in a beautiful outdoor environment.
Charlotte and Portia discovered a family friend's ranch near Lake Eldora in Colorado and determined this was the perfect spot to establish the Rocky Mountain Dancing Camp, an escape for society girls. After recruiting 12 students from Denver, New York, Chicago, Massachusetts, and Wisconsin, the ladies greeted their first dancers during the summer of 1913.
Life at the Rocky Mountain Dance Camp in Eldora was not easy. For one thing, the women learned that the climate there is not ideal. It's windy.
The camp was at 12,000 feet. The afternoon thunderstorms were brutal. The temperature was just impossibly cold every morning, ice in the buckets of water.
The bedding was primitive, the food was almost inedible, and it was far more roughing it than these young city girls were used to.
The second issue was proximity to Denver.
The young men from Denver heard about these scantily clad young dance ladies.
They would refer to them as these little nymphs dancing in the woods.
Young men would come to gawk, to camp out by the lake and bring binoculars and watch these young, scantily dressed women flitting about on the edge of the lake. Denver's newspapers made the most of this too, and one of the newspapers ran a headline that went, "Shades of Zebulon Pike, scantily clad women dancing on Colorado's peaks."
Charlotte and Portia grew tired of that.
They decided Steamboat would be a much more welcoming climate for a dance camp in the summertime.
Steamboat Springs is a really fascinating place. It started as a ranching community, and it served as a supply town for a series of mines in northwestern Colorado. First gold and silver mines, and then coal mines.
When they arrived here, the only building was cabine, and it was a small one-room wood structure that dates from the 1880s. Charlotte and Portia purchased cabine, and there was a small amount of acreage around it. They didn't have solid telephone service. There wasn't regular transportation that came from Denver. This whole part of Colorado was very remote.
They didn't see problems. They saw possibilities. Many of the cabins here were built by the coal miners from Oak Creek. Charlotte's brother Bob was running the coal mines for the family at the time, and when they needed a new cabin, she'd call up Brother Bob and say, "Could you please send a few boys? I need another cabin." And they're utterly simple, and they've withstood 100 years of 400-inch snowfalls in Routt County.
Charlotte and Portia wanted to reward the coal miners, and so they brought in the food that they were used to having in their more high society lifestyle and imported it all from Denver, and it took days to get here, and they served it, and they had this wonderful gourmet chef, and the coal miners looked at it and said, "Yuck, what is this?"
They were just gonna walk off. Charlotte begged them to stay. She called her brother.
And he said, "Are you crying?" And I said, "Yes, they don't like our food." Well, he said, "Have you given them grease and awful soggy pies?" And I said, "No, I haven't." Well, he said, "That's what they want, honey. They want everything buried in grease, and they want it overdone, and the worst pie you can possibly buy is what they want." So I gave them that for supper that Sunday night.
And oh, those guys were thrilled. "Yeah, we'll stay and finish building the cabin."
One of the realizations that Charlotte and Portia had was, in addition to having to build buildings, they needed furniture.
In Chicago, they live very near a casket factory. So they went over and said, "You need to teach us how to make furniture." These guys look at these two dames. They said, "Well, even if you build this furniture, how are you going to get it to Colorado?" So Charlotte called her father, and he said, "You can have one flatbed." And he also sent the specifications of how high the bridges were and how big the tunnels were. Of course, legend has it there's about this much clearance all around on that load of furniture. The beautiful table on the front porch of the office they made. And as you walk around camp, you'll see a lot of the red benches. That's all stuff they made, and it's still in use.
Charlotte and Portia were very cognizant of the connection between the dance and the environment, and so they built spaces that took advantage of both.
Because Charlotte and Portia went to Smith College, they brought people out from Smith College. So it was kind of a high society summer, and people talked about coming into Denver on a train and then taking a stagecoach up here to Perry-Mansfield, and how long and arduous that trip was. And it was kind of a rough journey for girls that were from advantaged backgrounds, and just having the whole rustic experience.
The campers lived in tents, and many of these young ladies had never camped before.
Dancers at the beginning used to complain that it was freezing, that they were sleeping in these hard cots with inadequate blankets, but that's part of the experience too, that idea of roughing it and becoming more self-reliant.
The other thing that was key to their plan was what they called the Brotherhood of the Arts. You didn't come here and just study dance. You didn't come here and just study theater, but you studied a variety of the arts.
Dancers who take theater learn how to emote on stage. They learn more about staging. Theater students who take dance learn how to move their bodies and again learn more about choreography. They all gain a greater sense of appreciation for each other and for art forms as a whole.
Charlotte and Portia also built their camp in the mountains because they wanted to take advantage of the wide variety of outdoor activities that were available. Hiking and fishing and tennis and horseback riding. These were all built into the curriculum.
Perry-Mansfield has always had horses. The founders felt that being a camp, being summertime, horses should be part of it.
Charlotte's sister Marjorie was asked to start the riding program, and she did.
And that's unusual to have horseback riding with a performing arts camp.
And they would take the campers on 3-day horseback trips up to the Continental Divide.
And they also carried their own water and made fires, and so it was a very well-rounded experience in every conceivable way.
In fact, Perry-Mansfield's equestrian program is the oldest English riding program west of the Mississippi.
Can you imagine this? Charlotte Perry from a very prominent Denver family, Portia Mansfield from the elite of Chicago society, coming to rural Steamboat Springs, Colorado with these wild, newfangled urban ideas about modern dance.
Both the Perry and the Mansfield families were not thrilled that their daughters were going to be great pioneers in Northwest Colorado.
My father said, you just can't do it. If you do it and you lose money, you can't do it again. If you lose money and you do it again, I'll disinherit you. Oh, goodness, I said.
And the locals at first didn't really know what to make of them and their activities. And these young women were frolicking around in chiffon in their forests and lakes.
People weren't sure about what might be happening out here. It was unlike anything going on in this area. So there was suspicion and concern, and we don't want them corrupting the morals of Routt County locals.
Local ranching wives believed that this was a nudist camp because all of the dancers are dressed in pink leotards. So they prohibited their husbands, who were supplying all the food and the milk for Perry-Mansfield, to come any further than the gate.
They felt Charlotte and Portia were somehow in league with the devil, that there was some kind of witchcraft going on.
I think people just thought it was more of a curiosity, but they soon grew to love Charlotte and Portia because they were just likable people. And once there were performances and people could see what was going on and see the atmosphere out here, then it quickly had a following and people came out to the shows and it just became part of Steamboat Springs.
When it was just a girls' school, local boys would be enlisted to come out to do square dancing. Some would be enlisted to appear in plays. People who were wranglers for the summer, helping with the horse program, they often ended up appearing in the plays when they needed men in the plays.
After those first few summers, the Rocky Mountain Dancing Camp underwent a transformation from a small group of performers to a runaway success. The newly named Perry-Mansfield Performing Arts School and Camp became a flourishing center for the arts, combining performance with a strong appreciation for the outdoors.
The ladies had enormous respect for each other's art forms, and their concept of the Brotherhood of the Arts meant that the dancers and the theater people were constantly intermingling.
The whole idea of Perry-Mansfield was to be experimental and try new things. Therefore, the people that came out to work for them knew that they could be experimental, and then somehow out of all of this new free thinking, what we now refer to as modern dance began to emerge.
So many people in the dance world believe that Perry-Mansfield is the birthplace of modern dance.
It was one of the very few facilities in the country that was teaching students to break away from the rigidity of ballet and teach an expression based on emotion.
And Portia had an amazing knack for finding excellent excellent teachers. They could experiment with this new form. They didn't have the naysayers and the critics of New York and other big cities looking over their shoulder. So she would bring in these young dance instructors who at the time were young nobodies. And those people included Jose Limon, Merce Cunningham, Hanya Holm.
Just like other art forms, when you bring together these incredibly creative minds and they're able to build off of each other and test on each other, you started to see this whole new dance form.
One of the prominent instructors at Perry-Mansfield was Agnes DeMille, who was an American-born ballet dancer who converted to modern dance over the course of her career.
In fact, Agnes DeMille was here when they attended a barbecue at a local ranch. The campers did a demonstration dance for the locals, and the cowboys who attended the barbecue wanted to show their stuff too, so there were fiddles in the crowd and they started playing.
So all of the ranchers came in with their trucks and they turned on their headlights and used the headlights to illuminate the dance, which must have been magical.
None of these dancers, who had all been classically trained, understood the cultural history of square dance. So they were learning the square dances. Pretty soon they were adding in their own whoop-de-doos.
Agnes DeMille was quoted as saying that she got her ideas for choreographing rodeo and Billy the Kid in Oklahoma at that ranch.
Among the other really notable people who were here were people like Martha Graham.
You can absolutely say that Perry-Mansfield was one of the founding institutions of modern dance.
In the same way, acting has evolved here. Social realism in the American theater was not created here, but definitely was developed here in a new way. That idea of testing real events and real emotions.
Another well-known alumna was Julie Harris, a well-respected, award-winning American actress, stage and film, who also was a student at Perry-Mansfield.
Julie Harris planned to study dancing, but Charlotte saw something in her and wanted her to do some acting, and Julie Harris said, no, I can't do acting. Stage fright just renders me speechless. I just can't get up on the stage. Charlotte worked with her that summer.
And the word is that Charlotte Perry cured her of stage fright.
Charlotte Perry influenced a lot of young artists.
Dustin Hoffman was here for 2 summers as a teenager. Apparently he challenged Charlotte quite a bit.
And he knew he was going to be the world's greatest male dancer. Again, Charlotte said, no, you're an actor, you're not a dancer. They fought about it for 2 summers, and we know who won that argument. But he was a colossal pain in the neck when he was here, apparently.
I thought Portia was always going to get married. She had lots of suitors. I didn't. I had a few and they didn't suit me.
Portia and Charlotte were very close, and they lived together their whole lives. If they weren't here at camp, then they were living in Carmel, California. But they had very different personalities. One was very businesslike, and one was a little more scattered, and one was theater, and one was dance. They joke very openly about how different they are.
And their relationship was deep and personal. And it's the kind of relationship that two people who very much love each other and very much respect each other have over time. They were inseparable.
The 50th anniversary of Perry-Mansfield was overshadowed by the inevitable departure of the 2 founders in 1965. Change was in the Rocky Mountain air, and only the next 25 years would determine whether the Perry-Mansfield Performing Arts School and Camp would survive without the ladies.
Charlotte and Portia ran Perry-Mansfield from 1913 up until the early 1960s. At that point, they were getting quite a bit older, and they decided they wanted it to continue, but they didn't have the energy anymore to carry it on themselves.
They never lost their devotion to the camp, of course, but it was just physically very, very difficult for them to keep the pace that was going. So they looked around at various entities that might take over the camp, and they had had a long relationship with Stevens College in Columbia, Missouri.
So after a lot of inquiry, they ended up gifting it to Stevens College.
The important thing to them was that it continue. They had been devoted to it their entire adult lives and were very interested in making sure that it lived.
This college gave their students credit to come out and learn theater and learn dance.
For a time, it continued as its own entity, but then increasingly, it became a summer campus for Stevens College.
Part of the magic of Perry-Mansfield when Charlotte and Portia had it, and really to today, is that students and faculty come from all over the country.
It started to have less of an identity as its own institution. In the late 80s, Stevens College was having financial problems. A huge negotiable asset for Stevens College was 100 acres on the edge of Steamboat Springs. So they started to make plans to sell the camp.
But by 1990, Perry-Mansfield was such an important part of the fabric of Steamboat Springs that the local community really couldn't imagine what life would be like without Perry-Mansfield in their midst.
Stevens needed to sell the camp, and a local group headed by Holly Williams just weren't willing to accept that.
The physical property of camp has been important to a lot of people in town on a lot of different levels. In September of 1990, I got a call that there would not be a summer of 1991. Stevens College had decided to put the land up for sale because they needed the money back in Missouri. They were in bad shape, and that there were already developers interested. We had to negotiate with Stevens College because they had developers with cash in hand who were willing to buy the property, and we had nothing. And so we got the initial money from the local community and then went from there. So by the time Friends took it over, there was years and years and years of deferred maintenance. So not only did we need to buy the camp, but we had to also immediately raise money to bring things up to current standards and to correct a lot of problems. We really didn't know if it would continue, and we didn't know if we'd be able to raise all the money to buy the camp. But alums came out of the woodwork to come and help us that summer, and also to bolster our recruitment. Lori Gamache, who was the original Cassie on Chorus Line, offered to come out here at her own expense and teach classes for kids. Sammy Bays, who was one of the choreographers from West Side Story, came out. People who had these longtime ties to Perry-Mansfield heard that the camp might not go on, wanted to add their expertise, and they came out here and did master classes. Ever since then, this has been run as Friends of Perry-Mansfield, owning this as a local nonprofit.
A lot has changed at Perry-Mansfield in its first 100 years, but the ladies' passion for the brotherhood of the arts is a continuous thread throughout each consecutive summer. Today, the popular camp is listed in the National Register of Historic Places and continues to draw famous performers and eager artists from across the nation and the globe.
Perry-Mansfield has always attracted cutting-edge instructors. First of all, because Charlotte and Portia were so well known and so innovative that they would bring people out here to Perry-Mansfield. But as the saying goes, they weren't here for the money. The scenery is part of the salary.
There's something about dance in nature. As you're dancing, feel the wind blowing underneath your arms.
The surroundings here at Perry-Mansfield definitely inspire creativity. One of my favorite things to do is go off camp and just look at those mountains, and every time I'm out there, I come back and I'm ready to get in the studio and create.
It's not just the connection to nature, but our connection to each other. We have a very tight community here when all these people converge, faculty, students, and we have every meal together, and we do everything at night together, and we spend all day together.
Being able to study so many different genres, not only in dance but in theater as well, has really paved the way for me going into the career I have now.
I remember driving into Steamboat and just thinking it was Brigadoon. It was this amazing, almost enchanted place. And driving into camp, you could tell there was a history. I felt like this is a great place to create art.
Coming here for the first time, I saw the dance studios and I knew I was gonna love it. Every morning, dancing in Pavilion, it's amazing, and the view it's breathtaking. You feel more free dancing here than back at home.
Perry-Mansfield is located on 70 acres of beautiful land. We have historic cabins, some that have been here since the beginning. We have historic buildings, a theater, studios, and it's just surrounded by beautiful aspens, little creeks that go through.
Perry-Mansfield looks very much the same as it did in the 19-teens and the 1920s.
It was rustic and rural when they first established it. It has not changed a whole lot.
The wildflowers are still here. We try to keep everything as natural as possible.
This connection that we have to the outdoors, we're in sync with the temperature changes. We're in sync with when it rains.
I think it's very important that these spaces be preserved. They really hold the foundation of the camp. You can feel the energy in the rooms when you get into them.
Well, you know, it's not easy to preserve buildings in this high Rockies environment. But it's very important to maintain the historic structures to present that fabric of continuity between the past and the present.
An alum said to me once, "This is the only place in my whole entire life that I can come back that looks the same." How many places can you go back to 100 years later, have the same look and feel? And that's pretty unique.
Each building you walk into has a story. The Julie Harris have certainly directed in there 10, 11 times. And every time you're there, you feel the history of what was there before you.
Here are these society women who grew up in big cities, who come out into the rural parts of Colorado. These women were coming out of an atmosphere where society women's job was to be beautiful adornments to their husband. But not so Charlotte and Portia. They believed in their own destiny. They believed that their own fate was in their hands and they were going to make the most of it and overcome any obstacles that were in their way in order to achieve their vision.
The fact that Perry-Mansfield is the oldest performing arts school and camp in the nation is something we're all very, very proud of. You just want that to continue because no one else can ever claim that title. Ever. You can't build a 103-year-old facility. You can't create buildings that have a legacy of the kinds of people that have come through Perry-Mansfield.
Portia and Charlotte started with an old 1880s ranching cabin. They transformed it into a hub of modern dance.
It's a magical place, and we say that because we feel it in our bones. It may be the old buildings, it may be the very, very natural setting that really has changed very little. It's hearing the music in the distance, it's hearing kids practicing lines. I think everybody feels what has gone on before here, and they tap into that and start to make their own magic and their own memories.
Perry-Mansfield has always been on the cutting edge of artistic development, and I imagine that that's going to be true for the time to come. As long as there's a robust community of support in Steamboat Springs, there will be a place for Perry-Mansfield in shaping the future of Colorado.